Now, the president unveiled a $3.8 trillion budget this morning and sent it off to Congress. And here's what he told reporters earlier today.
We simply cannot continue to spend as if deficits don't have consequences, as if waste doesn't matter, as if the hard-earned tax dollars of the American people can be treated like monopoly money, as if we can ignore this challenge for another generation. We can't.
All right, given what's actually contained in the budget, though, I'm not sure how sincere the president is about living within our means. Now, it increases the deficit by a whopping $1.56 trillion per year, and it increases the national debt $8.5 trillion. Nonetheless, the president is patting himself on the back for being fiscally responsible, citing a $1 trillion tax increase on the so-called rich. Now, this, in effect, puts an end to the Bush tax cuts. Now, the budget also freezes domestic spending on some domestic programs, which make up about 13% of the federal budget. It will cut or eliminate approximately 120 minor federal programs, but won't even touch spending on education, energy programs, research, Medicare, Medicaid, and Social Security. Now, it also calls for the formation of a bipartisan commission that will propose ways to reduce the deficit. So, in other words, this budget puts us as a country on the road to fiscal ruin. Now, South Carolina Congressman James Clyburn summed it all up in terms of the president's approach earlier today. Here's what he told Fox News.
We are not going to save our way out of this recession. We've got to spend our way out of this recession, and I think most economists know that.
And joining me now with analysis is the author of the New York Times #1 bestseller, Catastrophe. Dick Morris is back. DickMorris.com, your website. I want to just go through these numbers. So last year's budget deficit was $1.41 trillion, okay? Bush's last budget deficit and his largest was $400 billion. Now it's going to go up from $1.41 trillion to $1.56 trillion, and he claims he's fiscally responsible.
Yeah.
Help me out.
It's ridiculous. He said today that when I walked in the door, I faced a $1.3 trillion deficit, because he wants people to believe that it was 1.3 when he started, and then went up to 1.4, and now it's 1.5. It's not a big deal. So I was in Washington today, and I spent a lot of time with the Senate Finance Committee staff to get to the bottom of it. Here's what happened. In Bush's last year, the deficit was 500.
A little less than 5.
485.
Right.
And then it went up about another 100 to about 600. Then, when the banks fell apart, Bush passed TARP, $700 billion. And under the federal rules, any loan is the same as spending. There's no difference between lending and spending. There's no capital budget for the federal government. So all $700 billion got added to the deficit. And that's where he gets the figure of $1.3 trillion, the 600 real deficit and the 700 of TARP. Now, since he's been president, 500 of the 700 got paid back. Right. So the deficit should have been $800 billion.
So he's being manipulative.
Instead, what he did was he spent 300 of that on his stimulus package, and that's how the deficit got to be 1.4.
If we add up the whole 8 years of President Bush, though, what you're about a little over $3 trillion.
Right.
Total deficits, accumulated debt, if you want to call it debt, when it's accumulated. So almost in 2 years, he is basically met the debt that Bush accumulated in 8, and we got trillion-dollar deficits as far as the eye can see.
Now, when you said in your intro, fiscal ruin, I just want to be specific about that. Right now, we are in the same position as a country as the subprime borrowers were. Yeah. We're getting a teaser rate of 3% because we're printing the money we're borrowing. We're not really borrowing money. We're printing it, giving it to banks, and borrowing it back at 3%. The federal government has to stop doing that in the next few months, and then we're going to have to borrow real money at real interest rates. And this debt service that now is about $300 billion is going to explode to $700 billion. Yeah. Now, you know what $700 billion is? It's just shy of the total collections of personal income taxes in America. So every dime we spend on income taxes will go for the debt service. We used to have to choose between guns and butter. The new formulation is guns and butter or the deficit.
Well, Arthur Laffer, Rubini, you look at any of these major economists, Arthur Laffer said Obama's policies will cause an economic train wreck by the time he's done. Here's the question, though, that I have, and So he sounded fiscally conservative in the State of the Union address. We agree on that, right? He tried to convince America that I'm going to be fiscally conservative, freeze on spending. It's a small percentage of the budget. But then the next week, he gives us a larger deficit than the year before. All right, so here's my question. You worked with Clinton. You worked on triangulation. I still hate you for it. Kidding. And we asked the question, does he have the ability that Bill Clinton had to moderate? Does this answer that question?
Yeah, it does, that he won't. If he was serious about cutting the deficit, there are two things he could have done. Cancel the next stimulus package and not spend the balance of the past stimulus package. Those two steps together would be $800 billion. They would lower the deficit from 1.6 to 800 like that.
In a half, in one stroke of the pen.
What he doesn't understand, or he doesn't want to understand, is that when you spend money that you have to borrow, even if you spend it creating jobs, you're going to lose jobs, because a private business can't borrow money to create jobs. The federal government's elbowing them aside, and they're the loan window. Treasury debt has gone up 41%. Commercial lending has gone down 25%. That tells you everything you need to know.
Listen, and it's very predictable. Hyperinflation, interest rates, China. What if they stop buying our debt? Here's what I want to ask you. Now, I want you to put your political...
China's not buying our debt. What's going on now? They didn't pass. What's going on now is the federal government goes to a bank and it says, hey, you have some mortgage-backed securities, right? Yeah, I got $100 billion of them I want to get rid of. You do? I'll buy them from you at full face value. Here's $1 billion. Oh, and by the way, I need to borrow $1 billion. Do you have $1 billion lying around? Sure I do. I'll lend it back to you, and I'll pay you 3% for it.
Here's the last
That's
question.
How we're financing our deficit.
So now we're on one of the most important midterms, I think, in our lifetime. And here's the question. Michael Barone pointed out that if we used Obama's numbers in 2008 and the Scott Brown numbers in the Senate election, and we applied that to every district in the country, 155 Democratic seats would be up for grabs. You've even figured out that the Republicans could actually take back the Senate. But if you had to make a prediction now, where are we in the House and Senate in November?
You want a prediction right now?
Right now.
We'll win the House by 10 seats, and we'll win the Senate by 2.
By 2? You are out on a limb on the Senate.
By the way,
nobody would have guessed 3 weeks before the Massachusetts race.
I want to do a paid commercial here. If anybody out there lives in Wisconsin or Oregon or New York or Indiana and would like to be a United States Senator, if you're a Republican,
we need you.
We can win all those seats.
You mean Schumer is vulnerable?
Not Schumer, Gillibrand.
Yeah, I was hoping Schumer.
Yeah, right.
All right.
But by the way, if you want the budget numbers I threw out, go to my website, dickmorris.com.
Right. You need to write a column, he's no Clinton, in terms of his ability to moderate.